How long does it take to tackle a home project? With Angie, you could cross it off your list before this ad is over. Just tell us what you need, indoor or outdoor, repair or redesign, and we handle the rest, sending a top pro to get it done. You don't have to lift a finger, except to tap the screen or click the mouse. Plus, Angie is free to use. So bring us your next home project, and we'll bring it home. Download the app or go to Angie.com. That's ANGI.com to get started.
Survival on Ice. I'm Jason Horton.
I'm Rebecca Lieb.
And this is Ghost Town.
Canada isn't really known for being an invasive or conquest-centric country, but over 100 years ago, explorer Vilhjalmur Stefansson, a Canadian and Viking-obsessed Harvard alum, invaded Siberia with hopes to claim a new Arctic island for an airbase or stronghold, all in the name of Canada. Stefansson was the most famous Canadian explorer of his time, but this story isn't about him or conquest or even the tragedy that would befall his young, idealistic group of explorers. No. This episode is really about the remarkable Inuit woman Ada Blackjack, the sole survivor of the 1921 Wrangel Island expedition, one of the most ill-fated Arctic expeditions in history. The episode begins with Vilhjalmur Stefansson, I hope I'm saying that right, born William Stevenson in Ames, Manitoba. While studying anthropology at Harvard, he changed his name to the vastly harder for me to pronounce Vilhjalmur Stefansson to, I'm not even joking, give himself more of a tough, explorer, Viking-style vibe. His early expeditions were successful, and from 1906 to 1912, the young Stefansson traveled extensively through the largely uncharted eastern Arctic, adopting and learning the language and customs of the Inuit. In fact, he deeply loved and respected the culture, as much as a 20-something turn-of-the-century white guy can, and promote the North as, quote, the friendly Arctic, a place he claimed where, quote, a family could live as comfortably as they could in Hawaii. In 1913, Stefansson lost some of that hard-won cred when he purported to have found a new lineage of people in the high Arctic, descendants of the Vikings that he called, quote, blonde Eskimos. Nobody bought it, but even more damaging was the expedition of 1913 to 1916, where Stefansson got a large Canadian endowment for himself to explore the Canadian Arctic. There, he promptly led 3 large ships straight into an ice floe, and claiming he was going to hunt for food, hopped the ship and didn't return for weeks. The survivors left the ships, which were rapidly drifting off to sea, and traveled to Wrangel Island, a large uninhabited Russian island 87 miles off the coast of Siberia, where they were eventually, and thankfully, rescued. After that, I have no idea why anyone allowed Stefansson to oversee another expedition, but they did. And Stefansson needed a win after his 1913 disaster, so he, of course, was thrilled. He thought back to Wrangel Island, thinking that it would be a pretty great place for trapping and walrus hunting, profitable enough industries, and aspired to create a base there to search for an uncharted northern continent that he was sure existed. It does not. But this time, Stefansson decided himself to hang back, instead sending a dream team of young explorers back to Wrangel Island to plant the flag and claim it for Canada, and then the Canadian officials being so impressed that they would buy the land from him at a huge profit, making everyone happy and rich. And by everyone, I mean Stefansson. Bordered by the East Siberian and Chukchi Seas, Wrangel Island is very, very remote. During a brief visit in 1881, naturalist John Muir referred to it as, quote, severely solitary land, in the, quote, topmost frost-killed end of creation. Its claim to fame? Around 4,000 years ago, Wrangel Island was one of the last places that woolly mammoth lived. Their isolation there, some believe, ultimately led to their extinction. But what woolly mammoths couldn't handle, young, robust humans could, or might. Stefansson was pretty sure. He picked each person in his Wrangel Island expedition team for their strength, youth, knowledge base, and of course, excitement about going on a very, very dangerous trip. On board were Lorne Knight and Fred Maurer, both 28-year-old Americans and veterans of Vilhjalmur Stefansson's previous Arctic voyages. Then there was 19-year-old American Milton Gall. But they needed a bona fide Canadian to lead the expedition if the Canadian government was ever going to give them any money. So Stephenson appointed Alan Crawford, the 20-year-old son of a University of Toronto professor, and he himself a U of T college grad, as the expedition leader. At first, the Canadian government was not into this plan, but Stephenson went ahead anyway, convinced he could eventually get the government on board. If not Canada, well, somebody. Instead of paying the young team, he convinced them to buy stock in the new company he set up for the expedition, which feels like the older equivalent to like sweat equity or exposure. That and some private investing money was enough, so he sent the 4 men 620 miles away to Nome, Alaska, with enough cash to buy food, guns, tents, equipment, and clothing to last them a year in the Arctic. He recommended against taking too much food, convinced they would be able to hunt for everything they needed. He also discouraged the group from buying winter clothing, instead saying they would hire a native person in Nome to go with them, a woman preferably, to sew them winter pants and parkas from the sealskins and bearskins they would absolutely be able to harvest. So when they went to Nome, they put out word for such a person. The Inuits, being very skeptical of this group of white guys and knowing, of course, how horrible the living conditions around Wrangel Island were absolutely not interested. That is, all but the reluctant but optimistic 23-year-old named Ada Blackjack. Though she was very young, Ada had already lived a very hard life. Born in 1898, the year of the gold rush, in Solomon, Alaska, the region saw a dramatic change with the influx of thousands of white miners. That faded, but in 1918, the Spanish flu pandemic came to town, decimating nearly half of Solomon's 62 residents. When Ada was 8 years old, her father ate spoiled meat and died. After this, her mother sent her to a Methodist school run by Christian missionaries in Nome, where she was taught to read and write English, sew, and cook, quote, white folks' food. At 16, Ada married a local dog musher named Jack Blackjack and had 3 children, with only one surviving infancy, a son named Bennett, who had come down with tuberculosis. Jack beat and starved Ada and eventually left her and their son. It was at that point that she got a divorce, walking 40 miles on foot with her infant son back to her mother's house, and began making money cleaning houses and sewing clothes for miners. Despite her work, she was still unable to afford Bennett's costly tuberculosis treatment, so she put her son in a temporary home called the Jesse Lee Home for Children, so that they could better care for him. After that, Ada became committed to making money in order to get her son back and take the best care she could of him. And so, here Ada was, nervous about traveling with these strange men, skeptical of the mission and worried about her own well-being. But, being offered an unheard-of $50 a month salary, more money than she had ever seen in her entire life. But she also told the group that she did not want to be the only Inuit on the voyage, and the team assured her that there would be other Inuit families going as well. When considering the gig, Ada consulted with a local shaman, who told her that death and danger lay ahead, and that she should be watchful of fire and knives. Still, despite the shaman's prophecy, she felt like she had to go. The promise of a better future for her and her son was too seductive a prize. So, Ada said yes. On September 9th, 1921, the 5 left, sailing north. There's an incredible photo of the team. If you Google the expedition, you will absolutely find it. They're all bundled up in coats, looking very serious. They also have a little cat with them, the expedition kitten, Victoria, presented to the men and named after the crew of the ship that brought them to Nome. Victoria, or Vic, is in Milton Gall's arms, a grumpy-looking little tabby. Ada is the most stoic of them all, sitting in the middle, calm and focused. The next day, the expedition landed briefly in Russia, and while they didn't tell the Russians their mission, they did tell them they were headed towards Wrangel Island. The Russians pretty much laughed in their faces, saying it was physically impossible to go on shore and far too dangerous. 5 days later, the group touched down on Wrangel Island and did go to shore. The first order of business was raising the Canadian flag for King George, the British Empire, and the Dominion of Canada, covering lots of bases. Ada was not impressed by the land before them and realized that, unlike what the group had promised, she was the only Inuit and only woman that would be on the expedition. Quote, "When we got to Wrangel Island, the land looked very large to me, but they said that it was only a small island," she said in a statement published by Vilhjalmur Stephenson's book, Adventure of Wrangel Island. "I thought at first I would turn back, but I decided it wouldn't be fair to the boys." Soon the American ship that had taken them there returned to Nome, leaving the 5, plus Vic the cat and some sled dogs, to the will of the treacherous island. In the days ahead, the team began to unpack, adjust, and settle in on Wrangel Island. The Arctic winter was coming, and nobody had any real experience in keeping alive, much less thriving in such extreme climates. But Ada enjoyed herself at first. She had a crush. Alan Crawford, arguably the youngest and perhaps the cutest of the bunch, was her focus. Quote, "Oh, your beautiful green eyes." But her infatuation did not last long. Ada became homesick and anxious, and was treated poorly by the men in turn. Meanwhile, word was spreading about the expedition in London, Washington, and Ottawa, and nobody would touch it, much less support it. But back on Wrangel Island, the first winter had come and gone. They navigated polar bear attacks, dwindling food supplies, and brutal temperatures as low as 166 degrees Fahrenheit. Ada worked hard at sewing sealskin parkas, and the group looked forward to a relief ship that would bring Stephenson more colonists and supplies. But again, no one was very into this expedition, so Stephenson could not find the money to finance a relief ship, and definitely not on the timeline he promised the 5 explorers. After much back and forth, he eventually received a pity $3,000, equivalent to about $50,000 today, from his friend, famed aviator Orville Wright, and another $3,000 from the Canadian government, who was finally like, okay, we'll give you money. Very Canadian of them. The team on Wrangel Island became more and more desperate for help, and the ship Stephenson finally hired made it all the way to the Russian Arctic, but had to turn around due to the treacherous ice around the island. That did not deter Stephenson, who told media, the government, and even the parents of the Wrangel team that the expedition would have no problem surviving a second winter. But the reality on the island was grim. There was not enough food for them to survive there, so the 5 began plans for an escape to Siberia. When debilitatingly cold Siberia is more attractive than the place that you're at, you are in trouble. The plan the group had was to stay put in autumn and wait for the sea ice to harden. Thereby, they would walk across the ice and escape to Siberia. Alan Crawford and Lauren Knight decided that they alone would take the journey. Knowing there was considerable risk, the 20-year-old Crawford prepared a will, creating a trust that gave an annual award at UTS, the private school he had attended that is attached to the University of Toronto. On January 7th, 1923, Alan and Lauren, plus 5 dogs, set out. But after 13 days, they gave up and came back to camp. After a year of malnutrition, nobody was in a state to travel. After his attempt, Lauren became so weak he could no longer write. So Ada began keeping a journal herself, carefully recording the events of their days. Quote, "I'm going to the other side of the harbor mouth to do some duck hunting," she wrote in one entry. "I thank God for living," read another. Soon, Alan Crawford decided to try again. He would make a second attempt to cross to Siberia with 2 other men, Fred Moore and Milton Gall, leaving Knight in the care of Ada. As the temperature fell to negative 132 degrees, Ada prepared what food she could for the men to take on the second sledding mission. Remaining at camp was the incapacitated Lauren, the budding survivalist Ada, and Vic, the faithful tabby cat. Let's take a break.
Hi.
HBO Max presents Love and Death.
It is human nature to take risks. Would you be interested in having an affair?
Starring Elizabeth Olsen and Jesse Plemons.
You need to be careful.
Betty Gore was murdered by someone she knew.
The new Max original limited series Love and Death, premiering April 27th on HBO Max.
The truth has a way of coming out.
Listen to the official Love and Death podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi! Did I scare you? I hope I did. My name's Selena Spooky Boo, and you might know me from some places as of TikTok, where I do some sleepwalking and dad joke videos, but what you don't know is that Selena Spooky Boo has a podcast, The Haunted Estate, that's been around for an embarrassing long time, but I'm gonna tell you right now, it's full of the scary stuff, the spooky stuff, the hard stuff, and hey, some of the funny stuff. So come on over and hang out with us and check out The Haunted Estate.
Hello, how are you?
Hello.
How are you doing?
You good? You good?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Oh,
Cool,
okay.
Sure.
Wow, all right.
Cool.
Bragging.
All right.
Wow.
I mean, I say brag. I say
Yeah.
go for it.
This is
I
your
say,
time, yeah.
This is your time.
Yeah.
It's your time to shine, baby.
Yeah. And shine you will
Yeah.
on Ghost Town Podcast.
Yeah. We're
When
here
you
to
tell
lift,
everybody's like,
we're
oh,
here to lift people up.
I don't have my day in the sun. I did on Ghost Town Podcast on a Wednesday. They're going to be like, oh,
Yeah.
do you have the money for rent, or are you just going to keep talking about this? I don't know.
Answer that.
Yeah. Answer them.
We'll wait.
We want to say hello to anyone who's listening, supporting the show, spreading the good word.
Mm-hmm.
The good word of Ghost Town.
Thank you.
I walked by, I was leaving a stand-up thing, and I saw like a mattress store, and I was like, oh. And I was like, I feel like all mattress stores are always closed. Like they're closed.
Yeah, they're always
And I looked in, and it was like like a church revival type thing.
Whoa.
And I looked in, and I was kind of got sucked in for 1 second, despite my adversity to religion.
No, this is not real. Are you serious?
Yeah, but I mean, it's just so like you look in and just like everyone's having they're having their like kind of experience. It wasn't like we're speaking in tongues. There's music and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And
you saw a party.
I saw a party. I saw people having a good time and like music, and they got me for like 1 second, but then I just looked at my phone and snapped me out of it.
Yeah, that's good. You went back to Instagram. You're like, ugh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
God. Back to my miserable stand-up show, something fun and beautiful, and then back to my phone.
Yeah, and I was like, who can I compare myself to?
Good. Well,
you know, I can't compare myself to
who?
Our government. Good luck. I've tried to do it, failed every time.
How dare you?
Sauntering in, the mayors wearing their finest casual leisure. Yeah, they're just like kickback.
Casual leisure.
Just rocking a crushed velvet sweatsuit because it's crushed.
Yeah.
Velvet. It's like crushed velvet, like beyond crushed. It's so friggin' soft.
Whoa. Wow.
Cat Joselle.
Hello.
Sauntering in, just wearing the most high-end fleece.
I have all these items you're mentioning.
Not like this, you know. Not like this, you know. You got some Old Navy.
Okay,
junk.
all right.
This is the real. These won't catch fire the second we're near flame.
And just melt directly into my skin.
No,
Fuse
not at
with
all.
my skin. Okay.
Charlie Gilbert.
Hello.
And then wearing, you think it's out of style? Brought back to style. A Snuggie.
Incredible. Good on you. Great.
And it is embroidered as if someone's going to say, hey, that's my Snuggie.
It was a gift.
It was embroidered with an A.M. That'd be Ashley Matson.
Hello.
And just cruising at an altitude of whatever they want, maybe at some art museum or an opening or in one private jet or another. I think this person might just straight up live in a jet that's made of clouds.
Can we crash with you?
I just don't, and I don't want to know. Like, I don't want to know, I don't want to know what goes on behind the curtain. I hope it's crime. I hope it's illegal. I really do. It's not, but I hope it is. And is just sitting on maybe just soft human beings because they can. Like human furniture. Well, I do it.
That's great.
I'll do it. Sign me up.
You got to use local workers.
Our governor, Avian Noble. So no ads, no chit chat, just the good stuff. Bonus episodes. You don't want to hear whatever just happened just now. Sometimes I literally just, my brain just shuts off and stuff comes out of my mouth, and then well, it doesn't turn back on, so it doesn't matter.
No, my brain hasn't been on in years, I would say.
Head on over. You can get 7-day free trial. You can sign up, say bye-bye. Patreon.com/ghosttownpod, or you can support us.
Yeah, you got options.
Could do that. You know, maybe we can get a new, like when Rebecca gives me some water, maybe we can get a new glass.
You don't like that glass?
It's a good glass.
You just want like a better one.
I don't know, a different one.
You
want to shake it up.
You want to? I'm picturing like a Love Is Blind like goblet, like a golden goblet. You know, maybe something like that.
I feel like I'm always chosen.
Yeah, you're a king.
So I complained about my real problems. Do you want to head back to these other, I guess, problems?
Some actual big sounding problems that would change their life forever. Let's not go back to your post stand-up show woes. Let's do it.
And Cup of Water woes.
And Cup of Water, you're correct. Let's get back to early February 1923. Stephenson is in New York announcing his retirement from exploration at cocktail parties and press junkets. In Moscow, the Kremlin was making an international complaint that Stephenson's expedition was trespassing on Soviet soil. On Wrangel Island, Ada was taking care of her dying teammate. Unable to get out of bed, Lorne could not think straight, much less trap, hunt, or protect them. He became increasingly abusive to Ada. Though she was terrified of guns, she willed herself to learn how to use a rifle, and would walk miles every day in search of birds, fox, and seals to keep them both alive. Ada carried a snow knife and built a lookout platform above their shelter, as she often had to fend off polar bears from attacking them and stealing food from their camp. She also made a sealskin boat to use in the water. But no matter what, Lauren would berate her, throwing books at her and telling her her husband was right to leave her. But no matter how hard she worked, Lauren grew increasingly impatient with Ada as his symptoms worsened. But she continued to care for him, reading from his Bible while Vic curled up next to him, heating sand every day to place on his feet, rotating sacks of oatmeal to prevent bed sores, emptying his bedpan and keeping the fire going, even as she herself was suffering from scurvy. Soon Lauren started to bleed from his skin and nose, his teeth loosened, he began full body bruising, and completely lost his appetite. In her diary, Ada wrote of Lauren, quote, "He never stopped to think how much it's hard for women to take foreman's place, to woodwork and to hunt for something to eat for him, and to do waiting to his bed and take his shiad, S-H-I-A-D, out for him." I think she means shit. I'm not sure. It sounds disgusting either way. But on June 22nd, 1923, that's 6 months after the other 3 men left to go to Siberia, Lauren died and Ada was left alone on Wrangel Island. After building a barricade of boxes around his bed to protect his body from wild animals, Ada and Vic moved into the storage tent. Although it had been nearly 2 years since she had arrived on the island, Ada never lost hope that she would return to her son. Quote, "I don't think I could have pulled through if it hadn't been for thoughts of my little boy at home," she later told the Los Angeles Times. "I had to live for him." In her journal at the time, she wrote, "I must stay alive. I will live." On the night of August 19th, Ada had a dream. It was of a ship come to rescue her. But when she woke up, she found a thick fog had descended onto the island. Though Stephenson had retired from exploring at that point, a nagging guilt gnawed at him about the Wrangel Island expedition. Eventually, on his own time, he scraped together enough money, and though dragging his feet, sent a captain named Harold Noyce out to the island. When Ada heard noises outside, she couldn't quite see. Thinking a herd of walruses had come to her camp, she didn't get up eagerly, but soon she realized that what she heard wasn't walruses at all, but a ship's engine. She ran to her lookout tower, then to the beach, where she saw Harold Noyce wading ashore, a rescue ship behind him. Noyce was confused as to where everyone else was, but the grim reality soon dawned on them. Ada finally realized that Gall, Moorer, and Crawford were gone, and their departure was the last time the 3 would ever be seen again. Some theorize that they may have gone through the ice into the Arctic Sea, they may have been frozen to death, or they may have been eaten by polar bears, but no trace of them has ever been found, which left Ada as the sole survivor of Stephenson's grand expedition. Well, and Vic, who, believe me, I did the research to see what happened to Vic the cat because I was worried, but according to Atlas Obscura, Vic the cat survived. Noyce left a new party of 13 people and supplies on the island and took Ada back to Nome. There she had to undergo a humiliating and incredibly disrespectful cross-examination by the authorities, who accused her of killing Knight, or at least not doing what she could do to prevent his death. Though Noyce seemed like a nice guy at first, he literally stole Ada's diary of her time on Wrangel and also took off with Knight's diary. He and Stephenson spent much of the next few years fighting over the publication rights to the Wrangel Island expedition story. Which made sense. Stephenson was in a lot of debt, so much so that he offered to sell Wrangel Island, first to Canada for $30,000, then, after they ignored the offer, to the United States for $27,000. Of course, the island still belonged to Russia, so this was insane. But even still, 2 idiot brothers took the bait. Their names were Carl and Ralph Lohman, who purchased the title to Wrangel in return for an agreement to pick up the new colonists Noyce had left on the island. The Lohmans attempted to do this and failed. Then the Soviet warship Red October decided enough was enough, smashed through the ice, arrested the North American colonists, tore down the Canadian flag, and took the colonist criminals first to Siberia and then to China. The last American died in China, and the Inuit were eventually shipped home by the Red Cross. As leader of the expedition, Alan Crawford's legacy lives on. To this day, the Alan Crawford Prize in Chemistry and Physics is still awarded at UTS, the private school he had attended that is attached to the University of Toronto. Stephenson, slowly but surely, got back into the good graces of Canada and exploring circles, and even wrote a book about the Wrangel expedition called The Adventure of Wrangel Island. We've pulled some quotes from it earlier, and he promised Ada a cut of his profits. It was not a big seller, and of course, he never paid her. He died in 1962. In actuality, Ada never received a dime for her survival story, rarely gave interviews, and generally hated all media. But there was a happy ending for Ada Blackjack. She was acclaimed as the, quote, female Robinson Caruso, and by the Toronto Mail and Empire called the first Eskimo heroine in history. She got her son back, paid for his medical treatment, and lived the rest of her life peacefully in the Pacific Northwest and Alaska, albeit not very wealthy. Ada eventually got remarried and had another child named Billy. Ada Blackjack died, aged 85, in Palmer, Alaska, and was buried next to her son Bennett, who had died 10 years earlier of complications of his tuberculosis. But for years before her eventual passing, Ada's second son Billy had campaigned for formal recognition by the state of Alaska of his mother's bravery in the Arctic, determined that her name not be forgotten. It was not until a month after her death that the Alaska state legislature formally honored Ada as a, quote, true and courageous hero, which of course she was.
The Coca-Cola Company, Keurig Dr. Pepper, and PepsiCo are bringing consumers more choices with less sugar than ever before. From sparkling, flavored, and bottled waters to zero-sugar sports drinks, teas, and sodas, consumers are taking advantage of these choices. In fact, nearly 60% of beverages sold contain zero sugar. To learn more, visit balanceus.org.
Are you the type of person who seeks out the things lurking in the shadows? Do you thrive off of the fear, the mystery, and the unknowns of the world? Then you're in the right place. Something Scary isn't afraid of the dark, and we know you aren't either. Hello, I'm Blair Bathory, writer, director, horror lover, and host of the Something Scary podcast. Fear is a universal language. The things that scare us connect us. Every episode of Something Scary is filled with ghost stories, urban legends, and shocking accounts of paranormal activity sent in from our listeners around the world. Something Scary is also something special. We've been raising the voices of women in horror for over 200 episodes. Don't miss a single moment of spine-tingling fun. Subscribe to the Something Scary podcast wherever you're listening. New episodes are released every Tuesday. Sweet screams.
Hello everyone, what is up? It's Savannah Breimer here from the true crime podcast, Killer Instinct. If you have a true crime obsession like me, Killer Instinct is the podcast for you. Join me every week as we dive into the wildest, most twisted true crime cases. Anything and everything from unsolved, solved, cold cases, missing persons cases, and serial killer cases. Each case will leave your head spinning, so make sure you pause what you're listening to right now, head over and subscribe. That way you never miss an episode. We post every Wednesday, and I can't wait to see you there.